Order. It is 10:03, and this is Tuesday, July 28th, 2020. This is our special budget workshop that we had planned for today from 10 a.m. To 12 p.m. Joining me via Teams, we have Board Member Dr. Schiff and Board Member Jacqueline Rosario. And here in person, we have Mrs. Justice and myself. We are continuing to try to follow the CDC guidelines with social distancing and wearing our mask when we're not 6 feet apart. So at this time, I am going to turn the meeting over to Dr. Moore to review the items that he has listed here on the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have one item. This meeting was scheduled, that is loud. This meeting was scheduled last week. We had our initial budget review meeting. Based on the conversation that we were having at that time, we made a decision to schedule this meeting. We did schedule that meeting at that time for this particular week, as it was a meeting that was scheduled just over a week ago. One of our board members, Ms. Terry Barenborg, unable to be here based on when we scheduled the meeting, so we understand that. Absolutely a priority for her. We had the opportunity yesterday to sit with her an additional time and go through the budget. But this is a conversation where Mr. Fagan will continue to lead us through. We left off about halfway through the book of Ron, the budget book, as well as an additional addendums that he had made based on conversations that we had last week. So looking forward for Mr. Fagan to provide that information as we move through this presentation. Thank you, Mr. Fagan.
Thank you, Sue. Through the chair, through the board members. Following up on where we were on the last meeting, we had gone through the budget book and all the related tabs, and we had ended with the project review, and we were now going to move into the individual review by schools and departments, which you received a supplemental book that says supplement at the top. It contains the same information as the original book, with some additional deep dive regarding some comments and some additional information. No numbers changed, just additional information. So if you can go to the supplement book and go to page 54. This is where we left off last Tuesday. First page, and each one of these is divided up between each school and each of the major facilities. Page 55, the first school is Vero Beach. Keep in mind when you're looking at this report, this is everything in the ledger from the accounting side that hits this school's, including things that directly affect students, but it's also the other incidentals, such as electricity, classroom supply. This is the money that goes to the teachers based on money coming in from the state. It includes terminal pay, donations, summer school. Also, we have been tracking COVID-19 expenditures. So if a school buys something for COVID-19, we'll charge it back to that school. Also includes anything regarding facility rental, school recognition, anything and everything associated with that school that we may put into a separate project. It contains the same information here as through project, but this is looking at it as a school-wide basis, and the other tab looked at it specifically at the project basis. So you can see variations. Remember, the comparison is this year's budget to last year's budget, which we all know was a copy at that point in time, so it's not really a true comparison, and also compares to prior year expenditures, which is a good comparison, but we implemented staff allocation model this year, which therefore would have changed your allocations. You also had an increase in FRS. You also had an increase in insurance. And then, of course, you also through the year, you may have changed some of the funding mechanisms of how things were charged in the prior years to how they have been budgeted this year moving forward, trying to align things with what the services are and what the services are being charged to.
Okay. Mrs. Justice has a question.
Thank you. So one of the questions I have with a somewhat uncertain future as far as sports and different things, and one of the areas where there's been a big variance in schools has been in, remind me again what the extra money that a school gets to be able to do different things that they feel are necessary for their school is called. It's called discretionary spending account.
Yes, through the chair, that would be discretionary funding. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so when you look at a school like Vero Beach High School that has a strong sports program, that has football, that brings in a lot of money, that probably supplements some other programs at their school, and when we see a difference coming forward, right, some of that extra supplemental funding that they may be able to earn at their school, even if one of the areas we haven't discussed yet are schools that rent out their facilities to get extra money for their school. And will that continue in this time of COVID? Will we still be renting out facilities to churches and things? So has there been an adjustment to that discretionary funding so far to anticipate that, or will there be some? Has there been discussion about that?
Through the chair, I can respond to the discretionary. I'll let the superintendent respond to if we're going to rent out facilities. Discretionary funding is based on an FTE basis, so $100 per child. That's to run everything within the school for the school. If you rent your facility out, then there's a mechanism that if you collect $100, you keep 50, you spend 50 to the district. Based on, as you said, the school, if I have a more accessible area, then I'm going to generate more of that income than versus a smaller school who maybe doesn't have that space availability.
I have a question. Has it always been $100 per student FTE in this district?
I'm just making up that number. I have to go back and get the actual facility agreement. There's certain charges for certain
I didn't
rooms.
mean the facility agreement, I mean the discretionary spending formula.
No, ma'am. That was adjusted this year. Prior years, the number for discretionary dollars was a lot higher per FTE. We went and looked at the dollars that were there compared to other districts regarding discretionary, looked at the programs at the schools, and adjusted those numbers down.
Okay, good.
Because some of the schools had significantly what we thought was a whole lot of money based on their FTE, and other schools did not. So we adjusted them to be more in line.
Okay.
In terms of the facility rentals agreement, we will continue to look, as we begin to open back up, we'll look at those and make determinations, ensuring that the appropriate cleaning procedures and social distancing is taking place. But we will continue to open ourselves back up and begin to execute some of those agreements.
And the last question would be, because I would imagine that ticket sales and things will be affected for our high schools, for sporting events. A lot of other sports programs at those schools rely on that extra money coming in to support some of those programs, like at Vero Beach High School. So has the district looked at any way that we're going to support those programs at the school to be able to get us through this time so that we don't have a lapse in momentum with some of those programs, especially girls' sports sometimes?
So as we look at those particular programs, they are money-generating opportunities, both in terms of the Performing Arts Center as well as football being the major one. So as we look at returning to school, FHSAA has pushed the start of seasons or practice to begin on the 24th, which coincides with our start of school. But those are considerations that we would need to have. And cost-saving measures taking place on both sides. So the operation and run of a football game is very expensive. Police that you have to hire, security, ticket takers, officials, offsetting some of those expenses ultimately saves a little bit of money, but it's going to be very forward-thinking over the course of the year, and that is an additional hit that we're going to have to account for.
And one of the things I'm thinking about is not saving money, to be clear. It's sustaining programs.
Right.
That's where my focus will be, and I think over the course of the year is how do you sustain programs so that when we are able to get back to where we need to be with students in schools, that programs are continuing on and continue to have momentum.
Right.
Thank you.
To continue on, Vero Beach High School is the first report. I didn't know if there's any.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Fagan. We do have Mrs. Rosario. Go ahead, Mrs. Rosario. Your mic's off, Jackie.
Okay. Thank you. Mrs. Zork, I can barely hear you at all. Can I ask someone there to adjust the mics in general? Because most everybody, your mics are, it sounds like they're off, and we're only hearing an echo of
Mic check.
whatever someone, with the exception of Mr. Fagan, everybody else is almost at a very, very far distance.
Mrs. Rosario, the mics in the room are very loud, so we'll try to speak into them and be closer to them.
And it's not just for board members here, it's for the public too. You're very, very low.
Less talking then, I guess.
Okay.
I don't know, Dr. Schiff, do you hear the same thing that I hear?
If I turn up my sound, the board member speaks directly into the mic, I can hear it well, but when the board member is not quite on the mic and turn to the other direction, it's harder to hear.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay. Mr. Fagan.
Yes, sir. Through the chair. So Vero Beach High School, overall, when you look at the overall for all funds and all projects, they're approximately $1.9 million to $800,000 difference from prior year and prior year budget. But when you look primarily at their discretionary funding for salaries and benefits, it's a difference of $4,000 from the prior year. So basically, we have aligned SAM to be more in line with what was actually paid last year. Also, keep in mind that there could have also been a shift between, since we're still in the tentative stages, the funding for positions coming from the critical millage have not been finally set. We're trying to figure out where we're going to be next year and what we all want to put in there. So there has been a shift from funding from the critical millage to general. We'll adjust that as we get into the final budget to put everybody where we need. Keep in mind, we reserve some additional funding this year pending potential cuts from the state after the election.
Dr.
Can
Schiff,
I
did you have a
just make
question?
a quick request? Mr. Fagan, when you're speaking, can you refer to the exact page that you're on? Because the last page you said was 56, and that's broken down by category, not by individual school. So if you're on individual schools now, can you mention the page number?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. I'm on page 55 for Vero Beach High School.
It's the supplemental book, it's not the original.
Got it.
Through the chair, to continue, also, you'll notice that your best and brightest is gone from every school. For Vero Beach, that's approximately 305,000.
I have a question. Do I
Yes.
need to type comment?
Mr. Fagan,
Yes, ma'am.
do you mind explaining why Best and Brightest is no longer there?
Yes, ma'am. Through the chair, best and brightest was basically eliminated through the legislative session when they implemented the teacher allocation supplement, the $3.3 million this district is going to get for the increasing teacher salaries from wherever they are to the minimum of 47.5. Through the legislative session, they eliminated best and brightest and pushed all that money up to that allocation.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Dr. Schiff? Go ahead.
No.
No? Mrs. Justice?
Yep. When I look at the media services line, I'm trying to look and see what line that is, and I just lost it. 1076? There's a stipend that media personnel, one media personnel person gets, and they are supposed to be kind of like the chair of the media services across the district. I have two questions. Does the funding for that stipend come out of the individual school, or does it come out of a district fund because they take care of the whole district? And for some time, the person leading media services, I'm not exactly sure what that term is I'm looking for, was housed at the Freshman Learning Center and was somewhat disconnected from needs of elementary schools just by the nature of the work. We had something called a book battle. That was canceled because the importance of it wasn't seen at the high school level, but it was a really important thing for our elementary students. And just a little shout out, Terry Beckham brought it back and made sure that we had it, and it was strong with her team. So, but just a question about that.
Through the chair, all supplements for anyone who does additional services is all paid by the district. It is not, it may be charged to the school, but it's part of an allocation given to the school.
Okay.
The schools do not pay for all supplements like department chairs and et cetera that are in the union contract is all funded by the district.
And have those stipends remained the same?
Through the chair, no, recently, most of those stipends were recently negotiated as an increase in the prior year. I don't know specifically about the librarian, but I know they were all adjusted.
And through the chair, the second part of the question, you will see a higher level of alignment regarding those supplemental services district coordinators at school sites. number of examples in which there was a disconnect from what those individuals were doing in relation to district-wide events. Art comes to mind, media services comes to mind. So Mr. Meyer, under his leadership, is working with those individuals to have a higher level of connectivity. All good work. What we're trying to enhance is a level of support and services across all schools and communicating the good work that those individuals are doing.
So the stipend may be charged to the school, but then there's an allocation to cover it at that school.
Right, at the
Got it.
particular
I just want to
school,
be
right.
clear on that too. And thank you for improving those services.
And then Dr. Schiff.
Yeah, can you, and this will show up on each one, the Safe Schools application has gone, in Vero Beach's case, from 44,000 to 0. And I assume that's tied to the legislative money that was allocated for that. But can you talk that through a bit on the Safe Schools money and how, what's happened with that?
One moment, please, to the chair. I have to find my details. Yes, ma'am. Currently, for the safe school funding, there is a decrease by our schools. That's because we haven't pushed all the money out to the schools for safe schools. There's currently $1 million that's sitting in operations and safety and security. Once that plan is deployed, the charges will be pushed out to the school.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next page, 56, Treasure Coast Technical College. About $133,000 decrease from the prior year and the prior year budget actuals. Biggest decrease was a reduction in the general educational funding, which comes from the state, where this is still the tentative. There will be an adjustment because I believe the increase will be will there be a slight increase based on the tentative budget?
So with our technical program, with the GED program, how we have, normally that's an in-person offering to our students that attend. Are we offering that as a virtual for the GED at the technical?
Through the chair, following a very similar model than as our K-12, one of the things we are doing is starting virtually with our technical college. There's an hour requirement, so in order to get those students in so they can begin those hours, we'll begin virtually, and then they'll have the opportunity to come in and get the hands-on experiences with some of the vocational that ultimately is required, still following those particular models. So more of a blended model in our technical college. In terms of the GED, we'll have those same options available. So if a student wants to come and do it face-to-face, that would be option number 1, and then going to just option 3, which would be a blended model that we would use.
Is the funding set up so that if those individual students, because I know we do have, it's a blended of adults and our students who have dropped out, unfortunately, and they decide to go to do take their GED and study for that. So are we providing for those students that might need it, which I would think it would be a high number, in providing the laptops like we have our other students?
Through the chair, we've provided the laptop to all students,
Okay.
even if they are adult students.
Okay, all right.
Moving on to page 57 is the Accelerated Learning Center. Comparison to prior year is actually a $6,000 decrease, so the budget for this year is very compatible to the prior year expenditures. Slight increase budget to budget primarily because of SAM, FRS, and insurance. Next page, 58, is Rosewood Elementary.
I have a comment on
Okay.
those. There had been previous concerns on the Alternative Center campus about adequate space for lunch and different things. So I'm just wondering if, as we go through the budget for that school, if that school can expect to be funded and for their students to have adequate space on the campus.
Through the chair, one of the things that we're doing this year is really looking at the students who are currently assigned there and how long they've been assigned there, and then looking for opportunities to return those students to their home schools. No one's been assigned there since March 13th, and the reality is this would be a great opportunity for a fresh start in a traditional school. And then really over the course of the year, the charge under the leadership of the new principal, Principal Brown, is really to re-envision what alternative education looks like, shifting from a wait until they get their model to a very proactive on the front side of behaviors, getting in and connected to children at a much younger age to really have a higher impact on shifting and modifying behaviors.
That is wonderful news. Thank you.
Moving on to page 58, Rosewood. Slight change from the prior years, actually a decrease of 30,000. Again, this is based on the SAM and the FRS and insurance. There is a slight decrease in the discretionary critical millage, 81,000. Basically, as I mentioned before, that was shifted up to general. We'll redistribute that funding stream when we get to the final budget. Moving on to page 59, Osceola. Very similar to Rosewood, slight decrease from actuals of about $30,000. And the biggest shift is a decrease in millage and an increase in general funding, simply because that's where we put the teachers now, and we'll reshift that funding later.
Comment? So you have a new principal at Osceola Magnet School this year. This is a budget that you said is fairly similar to the budget in the past. How do new principals who are coming to schools access funds to be able to work to create innovative programs to meet the needs of their students?
So through the chair, one of the things we did is whenever we had a new principal go in, we conducted transition meetings, sitting with the deputy superintendent, looking through the budget, looking at academics, really transitioning to ensure that nothing, in that transition, that nothing is left over or forgotten about, and then ongoing support for new principals through mentors being assigned to them, constant development over the course of the year. So through Mr. Fagan's team, a monthly contact point, which we spoke about last month, really working through the logistics of being a principal, as well as each of the new principals will spend a year in a training program, which will be extremely intentional, because being a principal, especially when you look at the operational aspects and finance being the area in which they need the most support and development, it's just not typically something an assistant principal gets their hands on. We're shifting that reality through our principal preparation program. And for those principals who are just assigned, they'll participate in that program over the course of the year to ensure that we don't cause any issues for ourselves down the road.
Thank you.
Mrs. Rosario?
Thank you. Mr. Fagan, can you explain why some schools have more money for coronavirus and others do not? For example, Osceola Elementary received $3,082, whereas Beachland Elementary received $1,572. And Treasure Coast Technical College received nothing.
I believe through the chair, if we look at Osceola, the coronavirus is $3,082. Is that the number you're looking at?
What
Ms.
line?
Rosario? For Osceola?
I don't understand what you're saying, Mr. Fagan. What was the question?
The numbers you're looking at are for Osceola. For the coronavirus was $3,082?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's actual expenditures for 1920. The other examples are what was actually charged to the school toward the end of last year for any supplies they bought. It's not their budget for next year just for any supplies they need. As supplies are purchased, then we'll shift things to that line item and keep track of it. So it's just
Okay,
actual.
so it was based on whatever they needed for 1920. What is our plan going into 2021?
For 2021, they've been asked what do they need for their schools, what do they want. They'll use their discretionary funding to buy it. Okay, once we get it all accounted for, then we'll shift it to this line item.
So schools are going to take it from discretionary funding. We're not going to budget it for them.
Not specifically, because each school is unique as far as the requirements they have. Plus, during 1920, additional supplies were bought and stored at the school from last year. So it's kind of like we're not positive exactly what they need. As they need and require additional supplies, it'll be purchased, and then we'll move the expenses over and then put the funds back as needed.
put the funds back into discretionary?
Yes, ma'am. If the school toward the end of the year determines that they spent all their money for worst case scenario, all of their money was spent on discretionary, we will replenish that fund back.
Okay, gotcha.
It's an
So
oi-
Treasure Coast Technical College thus far by looking at this, do we assume that they use nothing for coronavirus?
Can I offer, perhaps they had cleaning equipment and supplies at the school that they utilized and they didn't need to buy extra, and in a school that perhaps didn't have a stockpile and needed to invest? That could be why there's a difference between schools.
Through the chair, and also, they just didn't code it to the coronavirus project. They bought it, they just didn't move it there. We'll look at that between, remember, we're in a year-end cleanup. We'll look at those kind of things to make sure we account for everything correctly.
Got it.
I'm sorry, can you please repeat that? The audio is so bad today.
Yes, ma'am. For Treasure Coast Technical College, they may have purchased supplies, but not necessarily coded it to that project. As we get through
Gotcha.
as we get through the year-end cleanup and looking at the accounts, if they did in fact purchase supplies we will move that expense into that project.
Okay, gotcha.
Keep
Thank
in
you.
mind, we're still in the year-end cleanup cycle.
Right, okay, gotcha.
Page 60, Beachland. Decrease of 122,000 or 4% from prior year actual. The two biggest items are the decrease in best and brightest of 75 and also about $45,000 in critical millage, which basically moved up to project 1,000 for their salaries. So basically no other changes other than some minor movements. Page 61, Gifford, 40,000 decrease from the prior year. Biggest decrease was best and brightest of about $29,000. It was a big decrease in discretionary millage, and it basically moved up from project 1567, which is the critical millage. Remember, we moved those teachers' fundings up to general funding for right now. So it basically is a shift in funding. In order to reserve money in critical millage, should there be a decrease in funding this year, we have a budgeted line item to cover that without affecting any other line items.
Mrs. Justice.
Thank you. This question is for Dr. Moore. Dr. Moore, Gifford Middle School has continued to be a school that's seen some challenges for some of their students in academic achievement. When we had previous meetings with Dr. Moxley, principals came at one point, we talked, and through working through the ULLC as well, Dr. Hodge and his team, doing a review of practices and procedures at the school, saw some concerns. So we've talked about principals who are new to a school. We've talked about people that are preparing to be principals, principals that were currently working at a school like Gifford, like Mrs. Jones, who has expressed in the past to this board that she felt that she needed more support for some of her middle school students in areas like math or reading. How does this budget reflect that support, and what is their involvement in the principal preparation program?
Through the chair, I think the answer to your question revolves around the training that we had last week. We spent 2 days with principals and their leadership teams really disaggregating their data and looking at their reality. Looking at the reality that has produced the outcomes within their particular schools, and then creating plans which will be aligned to our district's strategic plan on how they're going to overcome or address or eliminate those particular barriers in which they have identified. The ongoing support that we will provide from a district perspective really is looking at what meaningful instruction looks like, how interventions are taking place, how we're differentiating instruction within classrooms, how we have administrators who can walk into a building and define what the impact of that instructional reality, and then step outside that classroom and then say, all right, these are the shifts or modifications of support that I need to provide to teacher. So it really is creating instructional leaders who have a clear understanding as to the influence they have to create instructional realities that improve the outcomes for all kids. That's the work that we have continued to work on in the midst of COVID 10-week series for all administrators over the course of closing the school year and then continuing to build on that momentum. So I think what you'll see moving into the next school year, regardless of the option in which we have selected, very focused administrators working a plan that is based on student outcomes designed to improve the reality in which they've clearly defined on what that reality is, and B, where they want to move it to. So very comfortable that we're going to see shifts in instructional practices aligned to our reality, ultimately to improve student outcomes.
So I have a follow-up question, if I may, please. When you look at the school allocation model and it being applied to every school, and you look at a reality where students have been out since March 13th, and we recognize that there are going to be some learning gaps, right, that we're going to have to bring students up to a certain point. If principals are returning back to their campus, they have a fixed non-discretional salary at their school based on this school allocation model. How will they request additional resources to meet student needs on their campus?
So, through the chair, their allocation is designed to build a master schedule, and very generous in order to build master schedules defined to student needs. So a big piece of the answer revolves around putting students in the right instructional environments aligned to the right instructional teachers. And that's work. We've had 2 master schedule reviews already. We have another one taking place next week where we're looking at which teachers are teaching which students and the impact those teachers have had over a number of years versus the impact students need to have, and then creating professional development to ensure all students have the opportunity to be exposed to meaningful instruction. So it really is looking at, from a faculty standpoint, what is the need of that particular faculty? Are we seeking and getting input from that faculty to create development to ensure that we're moving them in a positive direction? So solid instruction, core instruction becomes the driver. If we get instruction right the first time, that is the most cost-effective way of doing public education. And then creating systems to differentiate instruction to meet the needs of all students in the classroom, and then designed interventions to help students fill the gaps, and really putting that 3-pronged strategy into place across all schools will ensure that we'll see growth and movement.
So what I hear you saying is that you have a lot of confidence in that school allocation model to be able to meet student needs because you're really improving upon that.
I think the allocation model really ensures that we're equitably distributing resources to where there is need. A Title I school, we've added Title I to that particular school, added significant amount of resources. So when you look across all schools and you look at the per student spending for all funding sources, you're going to see where the need is the most, the resources are also the most.
Thank you.
If I can also add through the chair, the SAM, staff allocation model, is your check and balance. It starts the basis for building the master schedules. If you build a master schedule and someone says, I need 10 more teachers, that's a red flag right now. Why all of a sudden do you need 10 more teachers? And based on the ratio and the initiatives and the programs that are in SAM, which are at a high level, but still at a detail level for you to build the master schedule. If there's that big of a disconnect, then we got to go back and look at SAM. Or is something else in the master schedule that we need to look at?
Well, and the reason I ask the question is this: I've heard parents kind of react to this idea of a school allocation model and thinking that it's just this cookie cutter idea, like you have this many kids, you get this many teachers, and I think it's important that we talk about the structures that are being put in place to support the staff allocation model so that it's not just X number of students equals X number of teachers, but it's truly, building those support systems within the school so that the staff allocation model isn't limiting, but creating the space for resources to be put where needed. And that's the reason I ask. It's something that people can put confidence in.
Absolutely.
Moving on, page 62 is Fellsmere. The increase from the prior year budget is actually only $29,000. From the prior year actuals is $238,000. The biggest difference here is, remember, if you're looking at a prior year actual, if the school had vacancies, then your actual will be less than any budget you ever compare it to. SAM assumes full funding for all positions and is loaded at full level, and then filling becomes the secondary. So that's why comparing budget to budget on the SAM lets the board have a degree of confidence, okay, that school did not suffer any staff cuts. It's got its full funding.
I do have a question, and it is general for all our schools. That we had our presentations from our elementary, middle, and our high schools back in the spring about how they're becoming schools of choice through their programs. But when I look at the budget, so if, for example, Fellsmere, they're going to be a school of languages.
Dual language.
Are they going to take that out of their discretionary to build upon that? Or are we giving any extra funding for these schools to really ramp up these school of opportunities and choices?
Through the chair, it's a cost that comes from discretionary aligned to the development that we're offering. So it really is going through the school improvement plan. What is the priority? How are we training our teachers to really create that particular model? It is, over the course of the year, seeking additional funding sources and looking at, grants that align to those particular academies. We just added that unit of work, and from a district perspective, so principals can continue to work the plan that they have developed over the course of the year, and the district can support looking and seeking for additional funding sources. But the drive is to give the principals the allocation of resources that they particularly have. The bulk of our money should go to schools. This budget does that. And then working with principals to spend the money that they've been allocated really to hit the outcomes that they set for themselves. So it is not a situation where we, go to the district, go to the district, go to the district. Here are the resources on the front end. Let's sit with you, align those resources to your school improvement plan, just as we're doing with our district strategic plan, and then embed the support over the course of the year to ensure that we hit the goals within that school improvement plan, while at the same time support the schools in growing it out 3 and 4 years by doing some of that research, writing some of those grants to ensure that we're continuing to grow and really transform what teaching and learning looks like inside of our schools.
Okay. I just think it's important that if we're going to advertise that we're now these school of choices, that we make sure that we can support that. So
And
that's-
through the chair, one of the goals when school improvement plans come before you to approve, you'll see their fourth goal will deal with how they're creating the resources and creating the support to really move in that particular direction. So what we saw prior to the close of COVID was a really solid idea that they had, some expanding, some creating new experiences for their children. And then over the course of this particular year, really shifting and growing that experience through interacting with the adults. So looking forward really to continue to grow that.
Okay. Thank you. Mrs. Rosario?
Thank you. What is the lowest 300 schools?
Through the chair, the lowest 300 schools are schools that were identified by the state as being lowest 300, and they received additional funding for teachers. It was originally to be funded out of the reading program. Upon my arrival in the district, we found out that actually it was simply an additional discretionary fund that was set up in addition to the allocation of the reading. If you recall, for 2021, your reading allocation is funding your reading coaches at all your elementaries. So in balancing the budget, the lowest 300 funding was basically consolidated into general fund for better tracking, and the reading fund was simply used to fund the reading coaches. So basically, in a short version, it was a supplemental fund that schools received additional funding for reading teachers. We commingled that and merged that into the reading coaches for 2021.
So any school that receives this funding, so far I only see Fellsmere, I see Dodgertown. I haven't gotten that much further in. Those schools that are receiving the lowest 300 funds, that category is to be used for reading coaches. Is that what I'm understanding?
Through the chair, no ma'am, it was replaced with the reading fund to give them a reading coach. So instead of getting that funding for the school specifically, the district will give them a reading coach using that allocation and moved it all into the reading fund.
So for reading coaches?
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
used for, okay.
So they got a dedicated reading coach versus an allocation to be used for additional reading instructions. So now they have a dedicated individual that is a full-time
Gotcha.
instructor.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Schiff?
Yeah, following up on the comments about grants and reading, I also noticed there's a decrease in the Moonshot Partnership Grant. Can you speak to that? Why that's decreased so much when that's one of their flagship tools?
Yes, ma'am. Through the chair, the Moonshot grant was, remember, through the Learning Alliance, and that funding has been shifted to give the additional reading coaches at the K2 level. So instead of being an allocation through Moonshot, it is now being specifically used to fund additional reading coaches funded by Learning Alliance.
So to clarify, does that mean then that Learning Alliance is supporting through the Moonshot grant, Learning Alliance is supporting the reading coach there?
Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Justice.
Thank you very much. This was probably a question for Dr. Moore, but perhaps Dr. Fagan as well, Mr. Fagan as well. I'll ask Dr. Moore first. Dr. Moore, it's always been confusing to me. The Learning Alliance is the group that supports this. It's not the Moonshot Community Action Network, and it's important as we move forward that we distinguish between the two. So it says Moonshot Grant. Is that what it's called? I think it's important for the reasons of transparency that if we do have a nonprofit that's supporting a project at a school, that the name of the nonprofit is listed so that we can be as honest and transparent with community members and our parents as possible. We appreciate and love the support. The reading coaches have been a wonderful, third grade interventionists have been a wonderful addition to our schools, and we have seen through some very targeted intervention student improvements. So we're thankful for that. Just want to make sure that if the Ed Foundation is supporting something or if the Learning Alliance is supporting something, that we're very specific in what we're calling it. Can we make an adjustment in some way in that?
Through the chair, I don't see why we would not be able to do that. I mean, I know we have worked significantly with all of our partners to coordinate services and in order to ensure that support is being provided where there is a need. So you'll see shifts or realignments of resources being done with a demand being placed on student need. So we have had significant opportunities to really look at, where support's being provided, and quite honestly, in the previous model, it was random or sporadic at best, where we got in where we could get in. And that may have not always been where the need was. So now you're a district-wide approach. The partnership is extremely strong, expanding resources to schools and drastically improving or expanding the level of support where need is the highest. So we're excited about those partnerships. So it's a matter of relabeling and identifying where those resources are being placed and who's providing them. That's what we should do.
I have a follow-up to that. So when we receive a check from this group, is it the Learning Alliance that it comes from, or?
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right.
Okay. And then to the chair, if I can follow up to Dr. Schiff, the variance that you see.
I think she stepped away.
Okay.
You'll have to come
Okay,
back to
I
that.
can come back. Moving on to Pelican Island, page 63. Slight decrease of 5%, approximately $176,000 from the prior year. Biggest changes there were, of course, $28,000 less in Best and Brightest, and we moved $158,000 from the critical millage up to general discretionary. And of course, one item here you'll see that varies by school is there was actually a $42,000 decrease in terminal pay. We don't budget terminal pay at the school level. We only charge that once the school has actually had that expense. So there will be no budget there for that.
One thing I do see that I would be very interested in seeing on these is the number of estimated enrollment, because when I look at this, I know Pelican Island has a very low attendance number compared to some of the other schools, and I would like to be able, and it could be another, this is long enough, but if you could provide that to me as I'm going through this, that would be helpful.
Through the chair, if I may. If you turn to your tab called Staff Allocation Model, and/or if you go to page 9, you'll see your FTE by school. But I do see your comment, adding it to those tabs might be a little bit easier because it'd be all in one place. But we can do that, yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Oh, Mrs. Justice.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make a comment on Mrs. Zork's comment. Pelican Island has been a school that has suffered from low enrollment in the past, but I just wanted to make note that Rachel Morey, who was the assistant principal at Vero Beach Elementary School, is now the principal there, as well as Jeremy Keene, who worked as a elementary science department Chair, through the district, thank you. That school is really exciting. Their school choice, Mrs. Sork, is really neat because they are right there on the reserve. They do so much work with plants and wildlife, and so I really expect that school's numbers to, that is going to be a choice school, and I have no doubt that they are going to have a full school by in no time. It's very exciting.
Yes, and my comment wasn't necessarily toward Pelican Island. I was just on that page trying to relate some numbers.
Oh,
So-
and my point was just because their, community might not know those wonderful changes, and it's an exciting year, so I just took the opportunity to highlight that school in a fun way.
Well, I appreciate that. Go
To the
ahead.
chair, also, one item we could also add to is the cost or budget per FTE. Then maybe that would allow you to do a comparison. Okay. Next school on page 64 is Wabasso. Slight decrease from the prior year, actual was about $11,000, no major changes in this school. Remember, Wabasso's staff allocation model is based on exceptional needs. However, how many students they need, whatever their exceptionality is, an allocation is given. Should it change anytime during the year, additional resources are supplied.
Mrs. Rosario?
Thank you. Can you explain why some schools have allotted science lab materials in their budget or were used for 1920 and are not budgeted for 2021? I think in this day and age when STEM or STEAM is such a priority across the board, providing science materials, I think should be a no-brainer. And if there is a way that we could provide that for all schools equitably, so that they, of course, can have their labs and feel secure that they have the equipment needed, how can we do that? And why, in the same sense, is Pelican Island, or did Pelican Island have for 1920? I think another school had it for 1920, and then others do not.
Yes, ma'am, through the chair. In the past, prior to my arrival, your categorical money was divided up and pushed out to the schools and rolled. Exactly how it was used was somewhat under question. Upon my arrival, I got with curriculum and I said, how do you really want to distribute this? And the question came up, we really want to have it dedicated based upon what curriculum wants that school to be doing and have it all aligned. So we began not budgeting at the school level and budgeting at the district level. When the schools come in and meet with curriculum regarding what they want to spend that money in, then the money is moved to the school and expended in that fashion. So it's kind of back to the superintendent's comment, define curriculum and instruction at the school level based on a broad-based view for all schools, not just every school doing something differently. So right now it's at the district level. I have approximately $12,000 for science labs. Once it's determined how it will be spent, we'll allocate it out to the schools. Kind of the same concept with textbooks. We don't allocate school money to the textbooks because the textbooks are determined by the budget, by the district and then pushed out to the schools.
So, yeah, so what I'm hearing is, and again, I'm just repeating because audio, there's a lot of echo and it's pretty hard today. What I'm hearing is that at the district level, we have reserved $12,000 to be allocated to the schools equitably for lab materials for the 2021 school year. Is that what I understood?
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Because if we look at Wabasso already has budgeted only $40 for their 2021 school year for lab items. Did I do that right? I'm getting right. Yeah, $40. Whereas if we look up at Pelican Island has $165 allocated. But Osceola Magnet has $274. So there's quite a difference in the lab material. It's already budgeted there. what I've just heard is that it will be budgeted equitably, but then how are we actually doing that? So it's already budgeted.
Through the chair, these small dollar amounts, as we allocate to the schools at the beginning of the year, should there be some small science materials that they want to buy immediately, that is more of a discretionary, then they can use that. The $40 for Wabasso is the only thing I can say is we probably looked at their prior year's actual expenditures, and they didn't necessarily spend a couple $100. So we kind of tried to match 2021's budget with what they had actually spent in prior years.
So are we talking with principals at any point to say, like with something like this, you know, hey, what have you guys done in the past? Where do you want to go in the future? Is this going to suffice for you? Or are we just putting money in this line item for the schools based on the numbers? Or are we making it a personal attempt? How is that working? I know, and I'm only mentioning the science labs now because in past meetings, I know that this board supports science materials. I know that I have heard this board on many occasions collectively say that we want that to be a priority, especially moving into the STEM era or the STEAM era that we are in. So that's why I'm just asking for clarification on this.
Yes, ma'am. Through the chair, the answer to the question is both. In order to not have the schools scrambling for money at the beginning of the year and asking for budget either through C&I or for the budget office, we allocate a very small amount based on prior years, just in case they want to go buy something right now today. Their plan for next year may be in the pipeline with C&I and Mr. Meyer as far as what they want to do long-term and what they may need $2,000 or $3,000 for. His office will review that overall request, let me know where to move the money and what they're going to buy.
So just to expand, as I referenced last week, principals had the opportunity to have their leadership teams come in, professional development, so instructional coaches, department chairs, the leaders in their building, along with the assistant principals, really to look at and define where their particular goals are and begin the creation of those particular plans. So in addition to master schedule reviews, really going back and making those particular requests. And I think a lot of the things that we will do going into next year as well as the future is to ensure that we're providing our children with materials and resources that are aligned to the standards. And every dollar that will be spent in this district will ensure that it is meaningful in terms of supporting student growth. And historically, as you look back, principals were buying things that were significantly beneath the standard or not even aligned to the standard, but kept kids busy. And that's an assurance I give to this board, to this community, that every resource, whether bought by a principal or used in a classroom, is going to support the needs of children in those particular classrooms. So it is an additional layer that we have added really to look at the content, the resources, the materials that we're exposing our students for. A, are they aligned to the standards? Are they delivered in a way to scaffold the students to the standards? Is the support being provided from a district or principal perspective in order to ensure that those teachers who are using those resources have been properly trained? It's just not something, you know, thrown at them and said, hey, go and do this. So being very intentional about not only the dollars that we're using, but how we're preparing the use of those particular items as well.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that there is an incredible amount of purpose done here, and the accountability that needs to happen at the school level with regard to our budget it is quite, what I'm hearing is going to be quite intentional. But at the same rate, we're also asking our teachers, we're also asking our schools to create program options so that they are an attractor, whatever that attractor program is for that school, so that they are a school of choice for our community. And so what I would like us to do is to make sure that even though we are ensuring the accountability, that we are not taking away from funds that could be used to grow their choice, and to be able to do that specifically. Just like in a classroom, when a teacher tailors a lesson and makes it differentiated for all of their kids, we want our budget also. And STEM is just one of the ways we're doing that. You know, I've get the check and balances system in place that ensures that we are going to tailored education at the school level, specific to what we need in the classroom. But I want to do the same thing with discretionary funds and the school choice. I just don't want us to miss out on opportunities for schools, for STEM schools, for STEAM schools, to give them more in discretionary so they could use it for that purpose. Whereas Ms. Dork mentioned earlier, Fellsmere is a school of language choice, so we can, push that a little bit more, give schools an opportunity to grow that program, and as we have so many other programs around for every school. So I just don't want to miss that opportunity there with each one of these categories.
Okay, Mrs. Rosario, there's a request that if you have another set of regular headphones, to put those on, because it's coming in and out, and I don't know if that would help or not.
It is a regular headphone.
No.
Wired.
The headphones that you connect to your computer with the wire, I think the wireless connection may be
I'm
causing.
telling you, the audio
Okay.
today is not me, but I'll change it.
Mr. Fig, I'm sorry, Mrs. Justice.
Thank
has a-
you. Yes, I do. So we talked a little bit about the Alternative Center. Now we're on Mobasso School. They're probably the two most unique schools of the schools that we have next to the Technical Center. So, we don't get an opportunity to talk about schools a lot with you, Dr. Moore. I know that Mobasso is unique, and because of that, I think there are sometimes missed opportunities with our students. Also, I recognize that student needs at that school can change depending on the enrollment throughout the year. As a school of choice, I also recognize that there are families in Brevard County who would like to access some of the services at Wabasso School as well. They do not have a school that I believe recognizes some of and meets some of student needs in the way that Wabasso School does. It's very unique. So I'm just curious, how do you, within the staff allocation model, when you have a school as unique as this, how do you remain agile and flexible in meeting those needs as they fluctuate from student enrollment?
Through the chair, those students are all staffed into the school, so it gives us a little bit of leeway in terms of understanding who is going to start and who is in the pipeline. We have IDEA that we can look to offset some of the funding within that particular school. So remaining fluid regarding what students are coming in. They are FTE driven, and when you look at the matrix, there are opportunities to maximize funding based on the level of support those children need. So it's being very intentional of ensuring as we create IEPs, looking at the level or the rate of services that we get that documentation absolutely correct, and then provide the transportation to get those students at the particular school. So it is a opportunity for us to leverage the funding that is provided at that scale or at that level to meet the needs of those students, and being very intentional of ensuring that we're providing that to as many students as possible, or as many students that absolutely need that kind of service.
Thank you.
Through the chair, also a point of clarification for the science materials. I have $10,000 in the holding account, plus I have a roll forward of about $32,000. So total, there will be about $42,000 next year for the science labs.
Across the district?
Yes, ma'am.
That's nothing.
Absolutely.
I mean, that doesn't buy, science, if Mrs. Berenberg was here, I think she would speak to the fact that consumables within science labs are incredibly expensive.
To the chair, that is only based on the science categorical allocation. Any additional would be funded through general.
Good, I hope we do.
Page 65, citrus. Slight increase of $95,000, about 2%. It's pretty close to prior year budget, and slight increase based on prior year budget, but we know why based on, okay, all right. Didn't know if there's any specific schools that we wanted to
Yeah.
look at in order to save time.
Go ahead. Thank you. If we could go back to Citrus Elementary, I recognize that Citrus does have a large homeless population in comparison to some other schools. I know it's a challenge that some of their students face. Obviously, when we talk about virtual instruction and the success of that, students who are struggling to find a place to sleep are certainly going to have a difficult time finding a place to plug in a laptop and to engage in virtual instruction. But when I look at Citrus Elementary, one of our largest elementary schools, and with a segment of students whose needs are oftentimes within our community unmet, how do we provide additional support services for those students beyond just that school allocation model? And in the areas of social emotional support, in some of the work that Mrs. Dampierre may be doing within her department.
So one of the things we did initially, reaching out to those organizations that house and care for those students, a direct distribution of laptops. So no, you don't have to wait in the line and pick up 6, 7, 8, or 9 of them. And those were the variations that we were able to give directly going to the facility, providing those particular laptops, making sure they're functioning. That's a rate of service that we did through Ms. Dampierre's leadership and her team, a constant connection regarding that social emotional support. Circling back with the school counselors, looking at the particular options in which are being selected so we can ensure that we can support them. So very aware of that particular need, and we're taking the appropriate steps to ensure that we're providing the highest level of support possible.
And I want to thank you for the guidance counselors. Schools like, all of our schools will benefit. Schools like Citrus Elementary, who truly need guidance counselors, social workers to help support students to services within the community, are so important. So I thank you for that.
Mrs. Rosario?
Yes, Mr. Fagan, can you explain the school recognition monies for Citrus Elementary, line 1578, in the amount of $69,000, whereas some others do not have that funding?
Keep in mind, through the chair, Florida School Recognition, $69,000 in 1920. That was the actual amount that they received per the state for Florida Recognition. In preparing this budget, we allocated the same amount in 2021 as a placeholder. However, that funding strip has been cut from the district. This will be removed in the final budget.
So this will be removed?
Yes, ma'am, for all schools. When we prepared this document, it was before we got the final budget, and that item just was missed to be removed. All schools removed this. This is about
And what was it for?
This is this.
Okay.
Go ahead, sir.
Florida Recognition Fund, schools that improved a letter grade or maintained an A, they receive a allocation from the state through the school advisory committees. They establish a plan on how they're going to distribute those funds amongst staff. So that's why you would see certain schools that either maintained a B or maintained a C or went down a letter grade didn't receive those funds, so there's no allocation provided.
Interesting. So moving forward, the plan is not to, that we are not going to get, or schools will not get any kind of recognition in this particular area?
To the chair, yes, ma'am. That allocation was cut from the state.
Interesting. Thank you.
All right, through the chair, most of the other schools will follow in the same kind of comparison analysis. You'll see the same variances. You'll see the same shifting. If there's anything specific regarding any one schools, we can answer that one, or we can move on to the next item for discussion.
Dr. Schiff does have a question.
Yeah, I want to follow up on Mrs. Rosario's point about the school recognition. I hear you say that that was cut entirely. Was that cut entirely simply from that category, or was that reallocated in some other way, like into the starting teacher's salary or some other categorical funding, or was that part of state budget cuts where it's completely gone, or did it just move?
Through the chair, that was completely cut from the state. It is a specific categorical funding we get from the state specifically for this purpose. It can't be moved or commingled, and they basically cut the funding strip.
And did I hear you say that you only found out about this yesterday?
No, ma'am, it was through the chair. It was toward the beginning of June. This item simply got overlooked. They should have never been in the budget.
Okay, thanks.
Matt, go ahead. Thank you. So one of the interesting things as we move away, we didn't do the FSA last year, and when we look at school grades and how school grades are calculated, It's kind of like, do you want the school recognition funds because the school gets recognized for getting a better grade based on the tests that we don't like and different metrics that we don't accept or think are a fair representation of what's happening at the school or student learning? So, while you never want to lose money, sometimes eliminating some of the procedures that keep those processes in place or some of those things can be helpful in taking apart that system, if that makes sense. And maybe Dr. Moore could, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, if you can say that in a better way that people could understand.
Well, through the chair, and the design, great idea, but in implementation, there ultimately were concerns across the state. An A school typically, in many cases, has the ability to maintain the A based on a high level of proficiency. So proficient students generate learning gains as well as proficiency, which is the bulk of the school's letter grade. In schools that are at the lower end and we're wanting to move and grow, growing schools over the course of time is much harder to do. So you get an incentive for moving from one particular letter grade to another. So what happens, I moved, and I can speak for me specifically as a principal, moved a school from an F to a D. We all had recognition money. Moved the following year, or in other cases, a school that was a C, more movement, just because where that school was in the previous year, it moved from a D to a C. The rate of growth within the range of a C significantly more than moving, could have been 2 or 3 points.
Right.
And those teachers received nothing.
Right.
Or the faculty, staff, teachers. So it's not equally distributed based on a rate of growth, just wherever that cut line would be. And in some ways, let me go to a school that's going to be an A because of the high level of proficiency just to obtain that additional compensation. So pushing money to salary for providing a high impact to our students is, to me, a better way of going.
Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Rosario?
Thank you. Can we explain the difference between the funding lines that indicate security versus safe schools? And just as what was mentioned earlier, safe schools, what I understand is that safe schools will be added to the schools in the final budget. But can you explain a part of that is why are safe schools and security? All right, let me back up. What's the difference between them and why aren't they included in the budget now?
Through the chair, can you highlight me where you see security?
Okay, the line 1599, general school security. I'm in Liberty Elementary, but every school has the same line.
All right, we found Liberty. Okay.
And that's line 1599.
Mr. Fagan, page 65, it's also on Citrus.
Through the chair, 1599 school security. This is additional security, correct? 1599 is additional security. This is the additional money that we'll allocate to the schools based on the programs and activities they have after school that require an SRO. Since we don't know what those activities are right now, instead of 1599 having a budget for the schools, we have $335,000 in a holding account for the security office. Once those programs are determined and because every school can't do everything if we were to all reopen and have all the activities, so there's an allocation that will be pushed out based on those needs. We don't know what those needs are right now, but we have $335,000 budgeted for school security for Project 1599.
Where is that? Where are we going to be able to see that $335,000 in holding?
If you're in the supplement book, if you'll turn to page 47.
on, I'm getting there. Okay,
Down at the very bottom, facility number 9554, Safety and Security Services, you should see a $335,000 budget.
okay. So why is the line different? Should the line be the same for the schools? The line number is 1599. In order for us to be able to connect the two, should it be 9554 instead?
The 9554, think of it as a holding account. So we put the money in 335. Once it's determined how much schools get to fund their additional services, we'll move that budget to each school.
And when are we going to move that? As they need it throughout the year, or at the beginning before the final budget is approved?
Both. Through working with Mr. Bass and the schools, he'll be looking at what activities they want to plan for next year, how many SROs might be needed, what the budget is, how much can we fund. We'll be able to fund up to about the 335, maybe a little bit more if we need it. Any additional security would have to fund from the discretionary. Or if they have a booster club that's doing activities, it can be funded through the booster.
Okay. And the safe schools, you said earlier, can you identify for the public the difference between the safe schools and when the safe schools will be added to the final budget?
$1079, if you will turn to page 35.
Yes, sir?
All right, if you look at, yes, if you look on 9554, you'll see $1 million. All
Yes, sir?
right, what this fund is, this is your categorical funding from the state for safe school funds. It is used to pay your SROs at every school. And also, charter schools will get their proportionate share. So the schools don't actually receive this money. It is used to fund their SRO at their school. Looks like in 1920, there was some miscellaneous expenditures that were charged to the school, or these funds were used in order to fund additional services. But the bulk of this money is to pay your SRO contract.
Okay. So some of the schools are not budgeted yet. Is that right?
No, ma'am, this money will be charged at the district level. Schools do not share in this money. This is to fund their SRO.
Gotcha. But some of the others, what are these other ones? Oh, those are the charter schools.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
I see. All right, that makes sense. Thank you. I have a follow-up, Madam Chair, unless you want to go with somebody else.
No, you're.
Another
hold on one
question,
second.
sorry.
Dr. Schiff?
Yeah, I have two things. One is back to the school recognition supplements, which I'm curious because Dr. Moore, you make good points about the misallocation of that funding or how it doesn't accurately really represent school achievement or the way the points are allocated, as you mentioned. In our strategic plan, we take a lot of things into consideration when determining how we're going to get to top 10, right? We talk about a variety of different measures. And to Mrs. Justice's point about wanting to move away from school testing as a measure of school achievement in ways that we don't support school testing, but rather have more comprehensive measures. In taking away this money, do you know if there is any movement towards more comprehensive measures for determining school achievement or school success or recognition?
Through the chair, as we move to a new new standards, we will have a new assessment criteria. So when you look at how we're calculating a school's grade now versus how we will calculate a school's grade in the coming years, not next year, but in the following 2 years after that, there would probably be a norming process, a hold harmless year, and then going back and applying whatever accountability would take place. Now, that information hasn't been made available as of yet. as an example, civics, U.S. history may not be part of the school grade formula. As they recreate the new standards, they'll recreate how we're being assessed and push that information out over the next several years.
Thanks. I look forward to us being aware of and staying on top of that, because it's so fundamental in terms of our own strategic plan moving forward to whatever is the criteria by which we say we will get to top 10 in the state, right? Those measures will really matter irrespective of recognition funding, but certainly how those things are calculated.
And absolutely, that was the thought from the beginning. The reality is how we're ranking ourselves and comparing ourselves across the state. As the shifts taken with accountability, we won't have to shift or modify our plan. Us moving to the top 10 when you're looking at proficiency or gaps as an example, even under a new, more rigorous standards, there will be changes or shifts. So that's why we walked away from a 2% or each year in terms of proficiency, because what is proficient under the new criteria would be different and because it's more rigorous, so you might see a downward or maintaining a certain mark. We're comparing ourselves under the same scenario across the entire state. Everyone's going to be exposed to these new standards, but we want to continue to grow ourselves within these new standards and continue to improve.
Yeah, it's actually a really good point as we continue to talk about the strategic plan moving forward and our relationship as a district with state standards and how those get calculated. Mm-hmm. On another point, following up on some of Mrs. Rosario's questions about the school safety allocation money. Mr. Fagan, you talked about the money that's held aside for SROs, for our payment for SROs, and then some that goes to the charter school. But are charter schools required to have SROs and to use that money for SROs, or do they just get a chunk of the school safety and security money and then they can allocate it however they want? Can you clarify that for me?
Through the chair, my understanding is, first off, they get a proportionate share. As far as what they do with the money is entirely based upon their school board and the school and the superintendent.
But are they also required to have an SRO in every school as we are?
Through the chair, I do not know. I'd have to research that and get back to you.
Through the chair, they all do currently have an SRO. So as Mr. Fagan was saying, they receive the proportionate share, and they make the decision. I'm going to have a guardian going through the guardian program and getting that certified, which also would lean on the sheriff's office, or having an SRO allocated to them. I think we were one of the initial districts that moved in a very aggressive and supportive way. A partnership with our sheriff's office is and other entities, law enforcement entities. We have an officer in each and every single school, as does our charter schools, and it is a cost share, which really puts us at an advantage.
Right, but the charter school doesn't necessarily have to do that because we do it, right? They determine how their safety and security money is allocated, and they can choose whether they want an SRO, a guardian, or some other security system. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Mrs. Justice.
Thank you. Dr. Moore, I know that since you have taken this position, you have been very busy, but I think this is an interesting time to have a conversation about what you anticipate your advocacy will look like, or your work will look like at a statewide level. It's been interesting seeing the response of other districts to your planning regarding reopening schools and your three options. We've seen other districts that have adopted and adapted the plan to meet their student needs within their county. I think that the accountability piece is interesting, and I think you have an opportunity as a young and very motivated school leader, young-ish, younger than some other superintendents, let's say, to lead in this way, to help the FLDOE with your team, with Mr. Meyer and Mr. Fagan to, recreate some of those those processes to be best by kids, as we say. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Through the chair, absolutely. I think we are in a really good place in terms of creating schedules. So we've worked with our principals all of last week. Principals are creating those schedules now, putting students within each of the three options. The work that Mr. Meyer and his team are doing now is to provide support and guidance to principals around what good instruction looks like within those three options. We crafted and initiated an MOU with our teacher union yesterday, which clearly defines kind of the rules of engagement within each of those three options. I don't know that any other district is there yet, so I'm very proud of that partnership and working through what will be this reality together. So we're really looking at what does good interventions look like within each of these three models? What kind of development are we going to provide to our teachers as they return? Just not, hey, congratulations, you got option 2 and click and go, but how do we really ensure that we're providing meaningful instruction? And I think that is, the communication that I've, provided to this board and provided to our principals is that, yeah, COVID is here, and unfortunately, COVID isn't going anywhere. But good instruction needs to be the constant within this system. So really creating good instruction. I think having our teachers back next Monday. Monday will be a day of procedures and process and social distancing measures that will be taking place. Really establishing those routines over the course of 3 weeks. But the majority of that time will be spent creating meaningful instruction and preparing for meaningful instruction that's going to ensure that we continue to move the needle for our children. So it's a brand new time, but it's a very exciting time because we're really thinking differently, which will help us way down the road when we move beyond COVID on how to create environments, regardless of the options selected, for our students to move forward. So it's a good work is being done.
My reason in asking is this, Dr. Moore. I would hate for FLDOE and FEDS and all of these superintendents to be making rules and changing things and to not have you be a part of the conversation. Back to my question about how you will continue to lead in the state of Florida in education. If we're doing good things here, I just want to make sure we're sharing that with other districts, because I talk to school board members around the state who are in the same place that this board or this district is, and it is scary and disconcerting. And while there are a lot of unknowns, again, you have emerged as a leader, so I hope you will continue to be a leader in the accountability piece as we move through creating, looking at these new standards and how we're going to judge student success in the state.
And I agree, and really working out and reaching out and having conversations with superintendents, both large and surrounding districts, ensuring that we are sharing the work that we're doing. And to be quite honest, it is an open book in terms of looking at our options, the background of procedures that we have. Some of the work that Ms. Maddox has done, I have shared probably five or six different superintendents reaching out saying, send me those videos. Do you have other ones that we can replicate, which is, acknowledges the work her and her team are doing. But at the same time, how informative it is and how easy it is to take just this little bit of information and put it in a really tight snippet to communicate parents. We'll be pushing out information in the coming week, both, so a significant lot of information regarding training for parents. It will be virtual. So more to come in that particular area, but always sharing.
Good, I hope that we do.
Through the chair, if we don't have any more specific questions on each of the fund centers, that would be concluding our presentation.
Mrs. Rosario does. Go ahead. Oh, wow. Huh.
Still?
Okay, Mrs. Rosario? You're muted.
Hello.
Can you unmute?
I think Kristen keeps muting me
Nobody's muting you.
because I'm not muting myself. I want to start on page 83, please, the teen parent program.
Go ahead.
To the chair, yes, ma'am?
Okay. What is this? Where are $83,000 going? How is this monitored? Where is the plan for these funds?
I gotta call a friend. Through the chair, this is handled through the ESE department. They handle these children.
They handle these children.
Student services, sorry.
Support for teen parents?
Support for teen parent.
Is there anything else that we can be told about $83,000 through student services?
Based upon the salary that I see, it looks like it's one position to handle, to work with the children, and there's $15,000 in discretionary funding.
So through the chair, a allocated position really to provide support. I think many districts have similar programs in place. We call it TAP in Miami. Really working through entering and exit transition programs to ensure that students who are pregnant have those opportunities to continue to be exposed to meaningful instruction, whether they remain in the particular school or an alternative school, or in this case scenario, maybe even option 2 or option 3. But there is a great deal of support and coordination, medical services that we coordinate you through this position in order to provide the highest level of support possible and keep good instruction taking place in the midst of that time.
And how are we monitoring this? You know, how are we ensuring? I mean, what happens if one year we don't have any? I'm not saying that we do, but just, what if we didn't have any teen parents in our district? What happens to this position or these positions or these funds? Because there's quite a bit here.
Additional assignments provided, so this, in particular cases, this might be doing some of the home visits for the attendance office, the attendance specialists that we've had in previous years. So there are additional assignments in terms of student services, site visits, coordinating with the counselors that we have, training to be offered. So there's not really just, that's my only role that I do, not in this district, not anymore.
Okay, so these positions or this position that's assigned to teen parent, because that's what this page identifies. How does this person or these people, because I still don't know how many, identify who are teen parents?
Through the chair, that would be working with the student services teams at each of the high schools or secondary schools. So it would be a referral from the school site team to coordinate services and support for that individual.
Okay, so there's at the school level, there has to be some kind of plan in place to refer a student for these services.
Through the chair, I wouldn't say it's a specific plan, but I think it's a known resource that is available. So a standard operating procedure when that scenario is available. Of course, the family, the student has to be willing to receive services and support provided by this individual.
Okay. I want to move on to.
Mrs. Rosario, we have a follow-up
Yes.
on that specifically, so, and then we'll go back to your next.
Thank you.
question.
Yeah, no
Okay.
problem. I just wanted to mention that the Teenage Parent Program is under statute. It requires that each school district establish and implement a Teenage Parent Program. That's defined as an educational program designed to provide a specialized curriculum and other services to meet the needs who are either pregnant or are already teen mothers or fathers and the children of these students. So again, this is an area where under statute we are required to have, but it looks like the funding comes from our general fund, so there is not a specific allocation perhaps for this, and I'd have to double check about it. But again, when we talk about unfunded mandates or things in statute, you know, I'm going to double check, but I don't, Mr. Fagan, I don't believe there's a specific allocation for this, just a mandate to have this program in your district.
To the chair, yes, ma'am, that's my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Rosario?
That was good. Thank you, Mrs. Justice, for that.
You're welcome.
The school board office, I'm on page 88.
We're not there yet.
Okay.
Can you hold on until we get to that point? We're
Uh-huh.
Sure
not
can.
there.
Okay,
So
through the
if you
chair.
want to continue,
Do you wish to continue page by page, or would you like just to go to general questions?
let's just go per page and see if there's any specific questions, and then just keep going. Okay.
Through the chair. Last one we were on was Citrus, which was 65. 66 is Dodgertown. Any questions? 67, Vero Beach Elementary. 68, Sebastian River Middle School. 69, Sebastian Elementary. 70, Glendale. 71, Indian River Academy. Any questions? Oslo Middle, 72. Sebastian River High School, 73. Liberty, page 74. Treasure Coast, 75. Storm Grove, 76. Then we get to our charter schools. 77, 78, 79, 80, and 81, ending with Imagine.
Okay, we have a question from Mrs. Justice.
Just a comment. We covered a lot of broad-based questions at the beginning of your presentation regarding schools and concerns. You know, one thing with Sebastian River would be a new principal, new leadership team, initiatives that are happening at that school, but we've covered how the district is handling that. So if you're a principal or your child goes to one of these schools and you're watching this meeting, it's not that we didn't have questions about each individual school, maybe what was happening there, but we did answer a lot of questions regarding schools across the district at the beginning of the presentation.
Dr. Sheff.
Going back to Sebastian High School on page 73, item 1905, what is Dory Slosberg?
Do you want to?
To the chair, yes, ma'am, that's the driver's education.
Oh, got it, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay,
Did you think we were just giving money away to somebody named Dory Slosberg? You never know. I know, listen, you know.
I had no idea, like, who's Dory Slosberg?
Yeah, absolutely, I get
She
it.
is. Why do we have a line item? Can you also speak a bit to the IB program? In the IB program in Sebastian River High School, there is, I'm sorry, the print is very small here. The variance, the amount is going down, it appears, by, sorry, I got to get the right line here, 21% or $56,000. Can you speak to that?
through the chair, can you tell me that number again? Oh, the IB?
IB,
Yes.
line 1086.
Yes, ma'am. IB program is funded basically based upon the anticipated revenue for next year. And I believe, give me just a moment.
And while you're at it also, AP is going down. Can you speak to that as well?
Yes, ma'am. For the IB program 1086, the revenue for 2021 is based upon the anticipated funding for next year, and I do see a $56,000 decrease in Sebastian, and it's because we allocated the 2021 budget based upon what was actually spent in 1920, which was $113,000. So we allocated 170, which is actually a $56,000 increase. It is basically a holding pattern based upon the FTE that school is estimated to generate through the program.
And would that same logic apply also to AP and dual enrollment?
Yes, ma'am. We'll get an estimate based on the FTE the school will generate throughout the year, and we'll adjust that as we get the FEFE calculations.
Thank you.
All right, we got through the charter schools. And then we move into the individual divisional departments. You got ESE school-wide. I'm on page 82.
Can I ask a follow-up to that previous one?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I'm not getting my comments fast enough.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm just not typing comment fast enough before Mr. Fagan moves on. This is with regard as a follow-up to what Dr. Schiff was just asked about AP and dual enrollment and IE. Is that the same response, Mr. Fagan, to Vero Beach? Because Vero Beach actually, their AP increased from 170,000 to 380,000.
Yes,
So there
ma'am.
was decrease there as there was in Sebastian.
Yes, ma'am. Through the chair, based upon the projected number of students to be at that school and the FTE they generated, that's what we allocated. They will only be able to spend it based on the FTE they actually earn. So it's kind of like a placement holder. It's a projection for next year.
Projection. So Dr. Moore, what is our plan to increase enrollment in our advanced course placements?
Through the chair, what we did this year is through master schedule reviews, followed a very data-driven process. Each principal had the opportunity, 2 different occasions over the summer and still another to take place, where we just didn't look at numbers, but we went student to student, looking at where students are being assigned. If a student has a track record of having the potential to excel in one of these particular courses, then they should be placed in those particular courses. Above and beyond that, that's just a knee-jerk reaction of really ensuring students across the board are placed in the appropriate courses, but really going back to 7th grade to 6th grade, looking at the advanced coursework, ensuring students get into AP based on what we're doing in 6th grade and 7th grade. And a lot of times what we saw in review of master schedules and where students were being placed, it is not pushing for rigor at all. Students staying in the regular course versus the honors course or a more rigorous course. So really, over the course of time, pushing rigor at all grade levels ensures that those numbers will continue to grow, while at the same time looking at students going into it next year and ensuring that counselors have a decision tree provided to them to place students who have the ability in those rigorous courses. Those courses are door openers, and they ultimately change the trajectory of a child's life. We need to ensure that they're being exposed to that kind of rigorous curriculum.
And supporting them in reaching those goals. Sorry.
Absolutely, and that is something that we're doing, is just not a remediation courses, but providing enrichment opportunities for those students really to prepare for those exams, to be conditioned or create the behaviors to find success in those rigorous classrooms. That isn't something that just happens. It is a learned behavior, and this is the training ground to develop those particular behaviors.
Through the chair, moving on to the charter schools, page 82, ESE school-wide. Any questions? 83, teen parent.
I do, Mr. Fagan, and I apologize. I know we're on a schedule here. I think as an explanation, and I've been given the explanation, but I think it's important to recognize why there is a difference in the number here. If Dr. Moore would like to speak to this.
You're talking about ESE?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know.
Page 82.
Through the chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
All right, basically what you had here during this year, you had some structural changes throughout the year.
Oh.
You had structural changes within divisional fund centers, and you also had structural changes with how schools were being given services and where they were being charged. And some of those services were being provided to the schools, but actually being charged to the division fund center. So in this example, that $1 million decrease consists of changes in the org structure for the BIS positions. Some of those were funded by general, some of those were funded by IDA. So you had a shifting during that design, which ultimately saved the general fund funding. You also had in this fund here, you had pre-K teachers. Well, they were not ESE pre-K teachers. So to better align the budget with the services, they were pulled out and moved into their pre-K function. Third thing you had is you had supplemental pay of $200,000 that was in here differential that we carved out. And then finally is you had changes throughout the year. People were put into the prior year budget, then they were pulled out, but then by the end of the year, their cost was there, part of the overall budget, but the position wasn't. So you had this reconciliation of you were there for 6 months, then you got moved somewhere else. Your cost didn't go with you. Your cost stayed here. So then the next year, when you looked at your comparison, you had a variance was because you had more people in the prior year charged than what you have budgeted in the current year. So it's part of that cleaning house and aligning function with budget.
So, for parents and individuals looking at this, I just wanted to stress that we are not defunding our ESE department. We're actually just cleaning up how we're allocating the funds in the general fund. And Dr. Moore, just briefly confirm that.
Absolutely. I don't think Mr. Fagan could have said it any better. As you just said it, this is really ensuring that the right funding source is attached to the right area. And as you look at this, it really speaks to having a clear focus, a clear understanding as to where funds should be to maximize the resources for all children. So if anything, we're expanding the rate and levels of services for our special need children.
Thank you. I know it's going to come as a shock to a lot of people, but we don't get a huge amount of views on these meetings, certainly if we're not tackling something that's controversial. So while Mr. Fagan's explanation was excellent, it was also very school district-y in the way that it was said. And I think Mrs. Zork's point is excellent. I see the Facebook post now, school district of Indian River County, what idiots on the board, defunding ESE by 21%. And you know what? You know, if you're just a mom sitting at home and you're on Facebook and you see that, you're like, what the heck is wrong with this school district? So to get in front of it, to message it properly to parents who have students that are part of our ESE program, that have IEPs, how are we communicating those changes and restructuring to them in a way that they can understand, because they're not part of the system and know all the acronyms sometimes?
Well, through the chair, one of the things that I've done upon starting is create a ESE advisory panel, parent advisory panel, have met with them over the course of time, even in the midst of COVID, having conversations regarding the shifts, the training of support. We had the ESE boot camp in which parents were a part of going into the school year. So when they look at the rate of services, the clear focus that we have, the priority in terms of improving that particular office, I think those parents are seeing a higher level of support, a higher level of expectation regarding the quality of support. And for anyone to look and say this is ESE, we're putting money as close to kids as possible, which means putting it at the school sites to provide the most intimate levels of support provided. And I think that is the creation of this. And to look at the other way, May said it may have been misleading. Whereas now, hey, listen, we're putting our dollars where it's most important, which is at school sites to provide the highest level of support to children as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to 83, teen parent. We discussed a couple of variances there. Physical plant, 84, only a slight decrease of 5%, either way, above or beyond the prior year. The biggest difference here is this is the impact of your 3 years of CWA contracts and the impacts of those salary raises, as well as increase in FRS.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a note. Bob Michaels, who runs the physical plant, previously worked at the hospital. And for anyone that's looking at our schools and the cleanliness of our schools and health and safety at our schools, I just wanted to make a note that that is something that parents should really take confidence in. He has an enormous amount of experience working in facilities, in healthcare facilities. So just a note.
Okay, thank you. Transportation. Slight decrease, 3 to 4%. Biggest decrease was because in the budget for the new year, you do not have all your field trips and your sub-drivers, because those are billed and expensed as incurred, so they haven't been into the budget. Reading allocation, slight variance of about 3%. Pre-K kindergarten, this is the offshoot of your ESE. Part of your $1 million moved here because they were not ESE teachers, they were pre-K teachers, so part of the reallocation. School board office, slight variance between 3 and 5%. Biggest issue here is that the board's benefit rate's a little bit different than what what Focus will allow, so there's always a year-end cleanup.
Wait, I have a comment. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Mrs. Rosario and then Mrs. Justice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question here with the school board office, looking at this page, what I heard you say is that this is the district office budget, correct? Not the school board in terms of the 5 school board members.
To
Is
the
that
chair,
right?
no ma'am, this is the school board office. These are the board members.
Only board members?
No.
These are our board 5 collective?
To the chair, yes ma'am.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear the beginning of that, so I didn't know if that was district funding or district leaders included in this. I'm
No.
just trying to understand this.
Sorry, to clarify, in salary, that also includes Mrs. Esplin, who's the full-time employee of the board,
Right.
correct?
To the chair, yes ma'am, this is everything for the school board office.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I have a comment. You know, depending on how the future of school board, this school board, what the makeup looks like in the future, there may be board member or 2 that choose not to take a salary. How does that happen? How does that work, and where is that seen? Where will that lead? That'll be reflected in here as 1 salary less, or?
To the chair, yes ma'am.
Okay.
Page 89 is the superintendent's office. Page 90 is school operations and human capital. This is basically Mr. Bass's new fund center since his arrival. 91 is school coordination of equity. Biggest variance there is the $80,000 that was budgeted that carried over into the new year. No major changes. Public information officer, that was a reassignment of discretionary funding. Chief Public Information Officer, we allocated additional funding for equipment, which was originally in IT. We simply shifted it to this office. Not an increase, but a shift. 9115 on page 93 is a various funds, various projects, and the gist of this is our holding account. If we want to put it in 9115, this is where we reserve funds for any additional needs, such as payments for insurance, supplements to the insurance plan in the prior years. Also for 2021, it's also where we have the additional positions for SAI positions as hold harmless positions for the schools. So it's kind of like a holding account. 9116 is also the major holding account, of which we have approximately 5.6 million allocated. That's in reserve pending any future reductions in funding for this year and or any additional services. Florida virtual program on 96. Keep in mind that we shifted positions from virtual into the CARES program, CARES grant. So that's why you're seeing a large decrease from prior year budget. Support complex 9918, slight in.
One pause here for Dr. Schiff, and that was virtual was on page 95, not 96.
Yeah, I'm on page 94,
Okay.
where it says the variance is 133,656%. Can you clarify, or is that a typo?
Through the chair, I'll have to check the formula, but you do have a relatively large increase because the prior year budget was 4.6. Now I have 13 million. That is correct.
Is there a decimal missing?
That's an odd number.
I'll have to check the math in that cell for that formula. But it is an
All right.
increase, but I can't guarantee that formula is right.
No, I mean,
Thanks.
where's my calculator?
I'm going to go that
That
far.
is not happening in my head right now.
Moving on. Page 96 is support services complex. Slight increase, primarily due to additional increases in FRS. 97 is the administration building. Biggest decrease was, looks like 37,000, 13%. I believe this was the shifting of custodial staff from this facility over to 9118.
Okay.
Curriculum instruction,
Mrs. Rosario has a question. Go ahead.
Thank you. Am I off? Yeah, I'm off.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to go back real quick to page 95 on the Florida Virtual School. I heard, Mr. Fagan, you said that this is related to the CARES Act, or the CARES funding is supporting the Florida Virtual.
through the
School.
chair, what we did is we increased the number of positions for virtual, but they are currently in the CARES grant. So that's why you see a slight decrease here. This is primarily to pay fees and services through this. The positions are funded through the CARES grant.
Okay, so is this Florida Virtual, or is this our virtual? Because Florida Virtual is very different. Florida Virtual has their own, it was my understanding that we do not have any contracts with Florida Virtual.
This should be this is for ours.
Okay, can we
And you-
change the name? Because if we say Florida Virtual, then the understanding is that it's the established Florida Virtual School in Orlando.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am.
So what would it be? Is it, you call it Indian River Virtual?
Indian River Virtual, yeah.
Indian River Virtual.
Yes, ma'am.
And then the other question is, I know that the CARES grant comes with requirements for us to be very specific on what we're using these funds on and how. Is it important for us, or would it be prudent of us to include on this page something with an asterisk with reflection of the CARES grant, or something like that?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. We can make a comment that additional positions are funded within the CARES grant. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Because that might not be there next year.
That is correct, yes, ma'am.
Right, but.
If the FTE increases, hopefully the plan is it will be self-sufficient.
Right.
96 is support services complex. Increase here is primarily because of shifting of custodial staff from the admin building, which is on page 97. 98 is curriculum instruction. You have a large increase in here, and it's basically because of an additional funding requirements that were shifted from other sources, and also because of holding accounts. I have $675,000 in the IT holding, in the textbook holding account, instead of pushing it out to the schools. It's being under the careful eye of Mr. Meyer to determine what's going to be done with that. We also have the Moonshot funding for 2021. This is for additional personnel that are at the district level as well, and discretionary funding of $188,000 for additional services he may need.
Okay, Mrs. Justice.
Thank you very much. Just wanted to take a minute to highlight the fact that for the millage that we're going out and asking voters to renew, in the past, the millage has not always been divided among departments in a very intentional way to meet student need. And there have been times in the past where curriculum and instruction did not have the I guess it's more philosophical, Dr. Moore, in the idea that curriculum and instruction drives all of the work of the district from the classroom perspective. So just a question as we go forward, the millage language is fairly loose, right? I mean, it is specific to where those resources will be spent, but there is flexibility within the district to meet needs as we go forward. What will the process be as far as innovation within departments and the millage being department heads being able to advocate for millage money to support programs within their department?
Through the chair, so what we'll do is, as we begin the process of creating next year's budget, really work through each particular department, looking at our strategic plan, and defining what work is going to be done. So the skeleton is there, which is the strategic plan. It really talks through those areas of focus and what we're doing within those particular areas, which is highlighted in terms of those three areas: teacher recruitment, retention, social emotional, support in 21st century learning, which you would find a lot of the 21st century learning support following within C&I. So we'll be very strategic in ensuring that it's not random or, oh, I have a great idea in year 2 or year 3, but ultimately supporting the strategic plan.
So one of the concerns about millage in the past, and one of the questions I've been asked about this is, how is the board informed about how that millage money or taxpayer money is being spent? Not that the board members necessarily have to authorize the use, but just a general ability for board members to be accountable to taxpayers for those funds and the additional things that are being created because of them.
Through the chair, I think as we move forward, transparency will continue to be a driving force as one of our guiding principles within our strategic plan, really providing a update to the board in terms of the millage funding. This is the percentage in which it's spent. It's not part of the general fund. It's supporting very specific areas in which we've asked the community to support, and I think the community needs to hear from me, delivering to you where those funds are being spent, and it's doing exactly what the community has supported us in doing, just not a little piece of an article in the paper with a bunch of numbers that it's very hard to understand, but a very open and honest conversation as we move into the budget preparation process for next year. X percent of generated funds from the millage will be spent within each of these 3 areas, and clearly defining how that work will be done. So just giving it a level of confidence that we continue to build upon the momentum that we've established, and being open and honest regarding where we're going and how we're going to get there.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Schiff?
Can you clarify, under curriculum instruction, item 1999, general fund discretionary, shows a 25% increase and a variance of 173,571. Can you clarify what's in that discretionary fund, or what's there?
To the chair, specifically, I'll have to get back to you on that, but there was a lot of shifting of items that were in the IT department that were basically curriculum instruction items. Just kind of the way things were done in the past, and once something landed in a certain area, maybe that's where it stayed for budgeting. We made an attempt to align, if this is your scope of work, then it needs to be in your budget. So there was a shifting of discretionary funding from maybe IT into curriculum in order to more align the work that Mr. Meyer needs and his contract requirements to put it in his budget. So it's not more money, it's aligning his requirements in his budget and reducing somewhere else.
And I think the theory of action there is funding priorities. And I think as we've distributed money across different offices or bureaus, they get a little bit of money and they do a little bit of things with it, and the impact is minimal, versus being very strategic and across the entire office, the curriculum and instruction, being intentional and saying this dollars, and to be quite honest, it's still not enough money, but we want to see impact with the resources that we have, and being intentional in supporting that particular resource over the course of time. From an office perspective, we'll see a higher return on investment versus a number of very little supplemental resources being purchased, in some cases that I wouldn't know about or the assistant superintendent wouldn't know about. We now have priorities. We have key, targets that we want to hit. As we spend dollars, we need to ensure that those particular dollars are going to help us move towards hitting those particular goals. So it's a design of being strategic and getting the most out of our monies, especially going into what will be my first full budget year, really aligning everyone's thinking to, okay, how am I going to get as much out of this money? How can I be strategic to have the highest return on investment? The return on investment is student learning.
Thank you.
So can I follow up, please, on that? Because we're really shifting how we do things, moving into the SAM model, and a lot of things are moving around. When there are large shifts like this, it's helpful to know where they come from and where they're going to. And I wonder if there could be either asterisk or a page, or if we as a board can establish a threshold above which we want to know where this reallocation is coming from or going to.
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
Comment? Matt?
Hold
Oh, I'm sorry.
answering the
I didn't
question.
realize I was.
You're next. Is that-
No, it's a statement.
Okay.
We agree.
Go ahead.
Okay, great, thank you. So if we just look at CNI and we look at lines 1963, 1964, 1962, we've got step into kindergarten. You have some different ways that you've split that up. I don't necessarily feel like 1973, 1975. I know what some of these acronyms are, and I'm looking at donors to the Education Foundation and the Education Foundation helping us with that step into kindergarten work. So I don't see Education Foundation necessarily, but I see Quail, I see CSEC, I see Johns Island Service League. Just curious how that's being broken down. And again, with our nonprofits, you know, we're going to be holding them to a certain amount of work and aligning their work with their resources with our work. Maybe in the future, some type of community report back to boards of individual partners that we work with, so they're aware of the specific work that's happening, and you could work with the nonprofit in doing that. But in here, there needs to be some consistency as to donors, because the Learning Alliance gets money from different groups, but we didn't break it down based on each funding group to that specific. So while you're getting a check from Johns Island or Quail or somebody, we're not always noting that, and sometimes we are, because do you see what I'm saying? Learning Alliance gets CSEC funding for some of their programs, so just want to try to make sure. County commissioners in the past have said, when we've had conversations about CSEC, there are county commissioners that have said they should not be funding anything that's happening in schools, because they feel that that's our job. We get the funding to do that. I'm not going to get into a debate about whether or not I agree with them. I don't happen to agree with them, but it doesn't matter here. It's just, how are we noting community contributions in this manner? And I'll be really frank and say, I think it's important when you look at financials for elected officials, when you look at influence within districts, not only in Indian River County, but this is something that happens across the state. It's important to be mindful of who's giving you money, what they expect from you, and you know, the community as a whole should be let in on the great work these nonprofits do and the donors that are supporting them.
So, through the chair, just an initial response to that very accurate statement. One of the things that we did under Dr. Long's leadership is we conducted an impact review for each of our external partners. They had, over a course of 4 days actually, had the opportunity to come in and present to a panel of principal and district staff the impact they've had in previous years, where they're providing those particular services of support, and what their expected outcome is going into the new school year. We were able to apply a rubric to that presentation. In its initial year, it's collecting and looking at equity. So ensuring that we have resources equitably distributed across all schools, and that the impact that they're stating is something that we can realize. So it was an opportunity to listen and learn and understand where resources are being provided. And from a district perspective, you know, we're the ones who open the door and provide access. So are we providing access in all of the right places? So a few minor changes or shifts based on what we learned through those presentations. But moving forward, a clear understanding on the expected outcome these external partners are to have. So as we work with them, we'll, as we go into that process next year, we'll be able to say, fully implemented with fidelity, we did hit the outcome in a significant way. We want to expand the access that's provided. We want to reach out to CSAC and say, hey, you do need to fund this. Look at the impact that it's having. And in some cases, the opposite would be true, just not seeing the return on investment, whether it's within our particular budget or outside resources. And I think that's important to note too. Things that are being donated outside, not in this budget, still providing services to our after-school services support, coming in and providing presentations to us so we know, at least for me, at full scale of the level of services that are being provided in this district, and having that understanding allows me to maximize the level of support, ensuring that it's being distributed equitably across all schools. So that work has started.
Yeah, and that's amazing work, and it's very important. And sometimes I think there's so much going on that we lose track of some of that realignment. It's very important to highlight. I'm very thankful that the Children's Trust millage pulled back for this year for a couple of reasons. Number one, I had a concern about a conflict of asking voters for to support both millages. But the other part was this, and this is something that I expressed, and I think the community should be thankful. we've had an opportunity to do that work. Dr. Moore and his team have had an opportunity to do that work, to look at the community partners that we're working with and to make sure that their work is aligned with our work. And I think that will put the community in a better place to be able to utilize any type of Children's Trust millage money in the future to make sure that we're not duplicating services, but that we're creating new programs that are best by kids.
Okay, moving on. Where we at? 98. 99, strategic planning and support services. Large increase here, but you had 4 positions that were removed, that moved from 9552 to this area. Again, back to the realignment of the superintendent's organization. And also you had additional requirements for discretionary funding for programs and initiatives within that department. 100 student services. Between budget and actual, you had a variance of -42, -63%. This is primarily due to positions also moving to 9552, and also supplemental budgets that were in 1090. Again, aligning expenditures and budget with services. Warehouse on page 103. Slight increase here of about 11% or 91,000. What this is an offset between budgeting and actuals, because you have a print shop. Print shop will print items for schools and departments, charge them a billing that funds back into the department, which therefore offsets the cost.
You skipped 2 pages.
Oh, did I? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, paperclip. My apologies.
Mrs. Rosario has a question.
Thank you. On page 99 with strategic planning and support services,
Yes, ma'am.
why is Neola Services in this category and not in another category? You know, not in like board, under the board budget or the district budget, or just curious.
Through-
Neola is who writes suggested edits or new policies for us based on statute, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Through the chair, this item was now realigned to go underneath strategic planning underneath Pam, and so we just put the budget there to pay for that service. It's just a subscription service to Neola.
Okay.
Okay.
And then strategic planning, with regard to strategic planning, does this budget, now that we have completed our strategic planning process for 2021 year, for the school year 2021, will this budget suffice for publishing of the new documents, the booklets, the getting them out to schools, the pamphlets, all of that kind of stuff?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. That's their additional, that's the discretionary funding they have within their budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Page 100 is student services. Biggest reduction here is the transfer of 1 position over to 9552. Page 101 is mental health. Got a decrease here of about, an increase here of 586,000. Once again, changing of facilities numbers, this was moved from facility 9224.
This mental health allocation represents the increase from the state.
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
This
Thank
is-
you to the state for recognizing the importance of mental health support in our schools. I appreciate it.
Page 102 is business and finance. 1% decrease from prior year, slight increase from the prior year budget based upon the things we already talked about regarding allocations, FRS. Purchasing and warehouse, page 103. Here you have a slight increase of about 100,000 in what from the prior years in the budget, and what this is the impact of the print shop. The print shop earns money on their printing services, and therefore that abates the cost, which therefore when you're looking at budget to actuals, we generally try to cover most of the print shop's costs by the services that they provide. 104 is human resources, slight variances. 105 is information technology. Your biggest decrease here is in your millage because most of that requirement was shifted over to capital or realigned with capital. And also help us reserve that 5.6 million in the critical millage for any funding decreases during the year. Teacher certification,
Mrs. Rosario has a question on that.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. I'm just finishing up my little note here. On page 104 with Human Resources Department, one of the things that we talk about quite often, and something that I bring up, is aligning our strategic plan with the budget and using the strategic plan to drive budget decisions. We are all on the same page with ensuring that our strategic plan needed to be corrected, changed, edited for this process, because the strategic plan is essentially our goals for the district. But, and in that, one of the discussions and one of the items that have become a key area that I know, Dr. Moore, you brought up in your first 90 days of observing and getting input from the community and from our employees as well, is the need for professional development, is the need for leadership development and building from within. On this page here, how can we see that that goal is within our page 104 in our Human Resources Department? Where can we see professional development, leadership development?
Through the chair, most of your professional development falls under C&I, so human resources are going to be the hiring, the professional practices and services of moving through and maintaining employment, as well as leaves, extended absences. As an example of the work, to take a leave as a result of COVID is being facilitated by that particular office. The creation of the systems for taking a leave are assigned to that particular office. Professional practice is assigned to that particular office, and curriculum and instruction. That is where we're housing professional development. Educator quality is the name of the office, and its pure intention is to create systems to enhance the skills of all of our individuals, as evidenced by our principal preparation program, our assistant principal preparation program, our Reignite initiative that just took place last school week, as I referenced in this meeting last week. Those are all initiatives taken on over the course of the year. Also, our coaching academy will take place over the course of the year. The principal development, assistant principal development, all will continue to take place over the course of the year. All of that work will be aligned, embedded into each school's school improvement plan. So that work is well underway.
So I appreciate that, and I hear you, and the conversation continues in that same way. I mean, you have my personal support in all of that, but when I look at page 98 under curriculum and instruction, I don't see any of that. And so this is the alignment that I keep saying that we need. We need to be able to look at our budget and simultaneously identify those areas that we have identified in the strategic plan as priorities and as goals moving forward. So I don't see anything that you've just mentioned in here. I may be missing it, but I don't see it.
I think what you're looking at here is the budget of the human capital who's going to facilitate the use of this budget. So when you look at the organizational design, the individuals who are doing that work and how they have been completely realigned. So some of the discretionary funds that are there, some of the dollars throughout this particular budget would be used to support that work. I think this is a clear shift in terms of who is responsible for what, narrowing their focus on what is really, really important. So if you look at the professional development team and the organization of C&I, which is not reflected on a budget sheet, but how they're using this particular budget aligned to their priorities is where you see the creation of all those initiatives that have already been implemented that I just referenced.
Yeah, so I think that that's what's missing. I think we're missing that. I think we're missing the picture of how our goals are being paid for. And, you know, how we have gotten to the point where we can look at our strategic plan and we can somewhat identify some of the target areas. If on the very last page of our strategic plan, as you know, there are academic successes there. There is areas or lines actually of out-of-school suspension and English language learners and students with disabilities, opportunities for community members, engagement in district activities. All of those different things are important. They're in our strategic plan. What we cannot see is where they align in the budget. We do see that in our budget book, there is a section for strategic plan in it, but how do we better, I mean, we've had conversations on this topic for a while. How can we be a model for the rest of the world in this, where theoretically the strategic plan drives the budget, but when we look at the budget, we don't see the strategic plan in it. So what's missing? How can we create this gap to better align these items?
Through the chair, I think my response is time. And I think we do have a strategic plan aligned to an evaluation system at all points of administrative positions that will be the envy of every other district. Once they stop thinking about COVID and get back to teaching and learning, we'll have a model alignment between strategic plans and evaluation systems, which we have created. I think the budget book, which is aligned by department and by objects and funds, as we move forward, now that we have a strategic plan that's approved, we will be able to create, and what you'll see won't just be the strategic plan in next year's budget book, but as we implement this work, we'll align the resources to where they have actually been spent. So going back and looking at focus area number 1, over the course of last year, we spent X number of dollars. In focus area number 2, we spent X number of dollars. So the spending, the gatekeeper for spending now is the strategic plan. So this is a budget book that looks backwards and projects into next year, and just giving you a dollar amount. What's really important is the things that were purchased with the funds that were provided. And as those items either I approve or come to you for approval, we'll be able to say, how did we validate that 25 cents aligned to the strategic plan, that moved our agenda forward as it relates to our work defined within our strategic plan. So I think, you see a lot of variance in this book as a result of the organizational shifts, change, and defining of priorities. Funding or allocation shifting from office to office, creation of offices that didn't exist in previous years. So the rate of variance in this particular budget book in comparison to the cut and paste that was provided to you last year is significant. And I think what you're going to have next year is a comprehensive book that is balanced with minimal shifts, because we have our plan in place, in much more detail as it relates to the spending connected and associated with our district strategic plan. So I think that work is going to evolve over the course of time. Now that we just approved the strategic plan at our last meeting, tonight I'm going to give a very brief but to the point presentation on how items will come to the board and how they will be aligned to the strategic plan, so you know exactly what to expect moving forward. So looking forward to providing that information this evening.
I'm looking forward to hearing that, but is there any way that we can now get a step ahead and not wait for a whole year to see that? Like, for example, is there a way that we can create a line that just says strategic plan, and monies that are given to schools to accomplish missions or goals that are in the strategic plan, we know can come from here, not limited to that line item, because obviously, maybe some discretionary funds in another category might help a school meet a goal in the strategic plan for, specific to their school. But if we can start somewhere, I just don't want us to have an empty playing field, really. But if we can start somewhere, possibly, I mean, is that even possible? Is that a thought? This way, at least there is still some kind of place where school board members might be able to say, or even the community might be able to pull it up and say, okay, well, if this school needed to fund an activity for, I don't know, let me pull it up. Completing the district, oh, that's the, okay, this, perfect. Completing the district restructuring with overall cost savings to the district. At the district level, maybe there might be, you know, a fund there that will say strategic plan. And I'm just kind of thinking out loud in this, but if we could begin somewhere rather than leaving it empty, I think we'd be able to get a head start. Does that make sense? Am I making?
Through the chair, I believe all we have here is a tentative budget which gives those who are charged with the responsibility of requesting to spend these funds that allocation, and then giving them the flexibility to understand the strategic plan and think through, hey, these are how we're going to use these available resources to support that particular item. I think going back at this particular time, given the midst of this particular reality, and then adding a line to say, okay, textbook allocation is this, it becomes just an exercise of something that isn't real. You know, we're just going to go ahead and apply that to one of the 5 focus areas versus saying the process that we're using is really saying with the allocation funds that I have, I'm going to connect it to one of my focus areas, which will be aligned to one of my key performance indicators. So we grow that over time as they spend dollars. I think the assurance that I'm giving to the board and to the community is that no dollar will be spent unless we're linking it to the strategic plan. Now, the allocation of the dollars, it's in the checking account, but the check won't be cashed or cleared until in that little memo line it says this supports focus area 1 and this is how it supports focus area 1. You know, so I think that's the information that comes, and that's why I say it grows over time, because the allocation is here. And then I think it creates the conversation at the end of a school year and throughout the school year that we're not spending any money in this particular area. This focus area is assigned to this cabinet member, yet we're not seeing any movement in terms of expenses. And you know, the overall expense in this district is salary. That is the primary expense of any school system. So we should really go back and look at, you know, salary. That would be a good starting point.
Thank you for that. I think we're at a slight disadvantage because we just completed our strategic plan at the same time that we're beginning the budget process. I think if you would agree with me, had our strategic plan been done, completed, and approved in, I don't know, maybe March, we might have been able to accomplish what I'm thinking in my head would be visible in a budget book. And would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you. As we go through this and I see the reorganization and the attributing funds to where they need to be, I just breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief, because in the past, as we've discussed, it was difficult to really be able to know. And I just want to say to this board how lucky going forward and looking at making cuts in the future, which are going to be a reality, that this level of organization and the way that this has been presented and the time you've taken to pull everything apart and then rebuild it will be so helpful in making decisions about what's really going to affect students and learning in our schools, because there will be hard decisions for school boards across the state. So, and as far as the strategic planning and the budgeting process, again, this is a roadmap, but it's not, it's certainly not exactly the direction that we will always have to go. Sometimes there are roadblocks that make us change. So, you know, as far as the strategic planning and the budgeting process, I feel comfortable going forward. I feel like we're more aligned than we ever have been in the past, and it's certainly a good starting point.
Moving along, page 105, information technology. Slight decrease here, about $2 million or so. This is because we shifted more items into capital in order to free up money in the critical millage. Teacher certification, you'll see a decrease here. What this is we do not allocate budget here until we receive applications regarding teacher certification. We don't anticipate. So as a request comes in, we'll load the budget accordingly. Risk management on page 107 got about a $300,000 increase, and this is just an increase in our overall insurance premiums for property liability, vehicles, and et cetera.
Thank you. So the school district has been meeting and will continue to meet on different executive session settlements. Mrs. DeGrasse, I can say that there are different legal issues that the school board meets with about, and SCRIMP, the group that we work with, as we come to settlements with different workplace situations. I just wanted to highlight and talk a little bit, because we talked about before, that SCRIMP, oh gosh, it just flew out of my head, the premium that we pay, excuse me. How has that fluctuated, and how has the actions of the board over the past year affected that?
Through the chair. Remember, a policy is like any other policy you have. The more you have claims and expenditures, your higher your claims will go up. So for any litigation, the more you settle, the higher you settle, well, that will drive next year's rates. Keep in mind, we're with a consortium, so everybody, if we have a bad year, somebody has a good year, it will balance itself out. So if everybody has a bad year, then everybody has a bad year. But being by ourselves, your cost would probably be 30 to 40% higher. So the advantages of being with the consortium is highly advantageous. The biggest increase this year was property. That was because everybody's anticipating and think there's always going to be a massive hurricane. Your other ones were only about somewhere between 3 and 7% higher. But because of the marketplace and our experience and our partners' experience, there's always slightly going to be an increase. And the overall increase was about 17%.
Thank you.
For us.
Mrs. Rosario?
Hi, what is the Monday, I'm sorry, I'm from page 106. What is the Mindset Mondays grant?
That is a grant that we receive. That's the PD.
I have. I'm just, can I? It's a grant through curriculum instruction, so they're pushing out information and content on Monday as we begin each week. You can see it in various platforms, really just kind of giving us a tidbit, social media, and surrounding information in the background, really to ensure that we're getting development in very relevant ways.
To teachers, right?
Through the chair, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on, page 108, operations. Slight decrease here. This also refers back to 9554, security. Had some shifting and reallocating services and funding. So if you look at 9554, you'll see about $1 million pickup there. Facilities 109, slight increase of 3%. Student assignment, have about a $300,000 decrease, and this is because you had positions that moved to strategic planning, 9223, once again, part of the alignment process. Page 111 is the building department, slight change because of increase in FRS. Page 112 is safety and security. This is where you see the $1.2 million coming into the department and some of the security money and holding for safety of schools and the security program. And that's the last page.
So, Madam Chair, that is the presentation. I can tell you in my 25 years and my 8 years downtown, this is the most extensive process I've ever been a part of as we have reviewed an initial budget. But very proud of the work that Mr. Fagan has done. Very proud of the quality of questions and the precision in which each of you look at our budget. I'm very thankful to engage in those conversations. It really does ensure that we are putting together a product that is supported and created not only with a budget, but a very solid strategic plan to ensure that we're maximizing the dollars of this particular presentation. So that is our presentation. Mr. Fay, I don't know if you have any closing remarks. With that, I'll turn it back over to the chair.
All right, so we will adjourn this meeting at 12:31, and we will be back at 5:01 this evening.